The Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, chapter 4. Glory to you, O Lord. On that day, when evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. And other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we're perishing?" And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. He said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, "Who then is this that even wind and sea obey him?" This is the gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Let's confess our... All right, let's look at the gospel reading from Mark chapter 4, which is the sermon text for this morning, the story of Jesus calming the storm. This story, I mean, like so many of the stories in the Gospels, and Mark does a really good job of this, actually. It just feels very, very real. It's very, there's so much about it that's real. Jesus seems like a very, very real person. The questions that he's grappling with seem very, very real to my experience of what it's like to be a Christian, too. And this is one of the unique things about the Gospels. Whenever I hear people say, if you can let me do a couple minutes of apologetics here real quick. Whenever I hear people say, oh, you know, like these legends get brought up, you know, there's this guy who lives, his name's Jesus, and, you know, the next thing you know, 50 years later, he gets blown up into this big, it's just legendary stories that you can't believe them, they're all mythical. The difference, though, is that it doesn't really, I always think, have you actually read the Gospels? It doesn't feel like legend or myth at all, and I'm not the first person to say that. C.S. Lewis said it 50 or 60 years ago, that as somebody, when he came to faith, one of the reasons he came to faith was that he began reading the Gospels. He was a professor. He taught Norse legends and myths. He was a big fan of mythology, and he read the Gospels and just thought, this isn't mythology at all. This is like too gritty. It's too down to earth. It's too real. Francis Spufford points out, too, that it just doesn't work like myth. What myth is, you know, when a culture creates a myth, what it does is it takes something normal and ordinary and commonplace, and then it blows it up to be bigger. So, for instance, like the just to pick one at random almost, the myth of Paul Bunyan, it has to do with, the John Brown myth is the same way. You know, people who are famously strong, lumberjacks, and people who are railroad workers. And there's these guys who are just really strong and they're really good at it. And over time it gets blown up into this, you know, Paul Bunyan is probably, if there is a real historical person behind the Paul Bunyan, it's just an ordinary guy who happens to be a strong lumberjack. But over time it gets blown up into this guy who's 70 feet tall. It's completely extraordinary. And he's got this big blue ox that's as big as a house, and he cuts down whole forests with one swing of his axe and things like that. It's something ordinary. And myths tend to be something ordinary that gets blown up into something big. Here's a river. It's just the river that we live by. But we know it's important for our life. What happens? It gets blown up into being Canute, the Egyptian river god. That's the way it works. However, with the Gospels, you get the opposite thing, Francis Spufford points out. You get the creator God of the universe, the extraordinary, whereas in myth, ordinary gets blown up into extraordinary. In the Gospels, the extraordinary, the big, the uncommon, the creator God of the universe becomes ordinary and regular. The big becomes squeezed down into the small. It doesn't feel like myth at all. What myth would have its hero falling asleep in the back of a boat while there's a storm? Almost insensible to his surroundings. It's very odd, but very real. I mean, it would be odd if it were myth, but if it's real life, it just feels like real life. The other thing that's very, very real about this story is, and this is going to be the point of the sermon, is that it's like my experience as a Christian, and yours too, I know, from talking to many of you. The question of the disciples, don't you care if we're perishing? Where are you at? This is not the last time that Jesus is going to get answered this question. You're supposed to be helping us out here. Where are you at? We're about to die, and you're AWOL. That's the question that every single one of us, those of us who are Christians, have had. And even those of you who are unbelievers who are grappling with, that's one of the reasons why you're here, is if there's a God, I want to know that there's a God. If there is a storm, well, I know that there is a storm. Is there somebody who can help me out? That's the question of the disciples. So this, there's nothing, this is not putting off. The Gospels don't put off the important questions that you and I have. They grapple with them in real time. And that's what this story here is doing, the story of Jesus calming the storm. So let me just walk through, but basically we're just going to walk through kind of the story, but I'm going to talk about what the story means for your life and my life too. So for starters, we're going to look at verse 35. On that day when evening had come, Jesus said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." Sometimes Jesus leads us into danger. Sometimes Jesus leads us into danger. Sometimes Jesus leads us into heartbreak. He leads us into imprisonments and beatings and shipwrecks and loneliness. I know that this doesn't fit in with the classic American Jesus myth. Well, the American church has tended to take Jesus and say, here's Jesus, he can make your life better. And Jesus says, no, let's go in this boat to the other side. And I'm not going to tell you this right now, but there's going to be this massive storm. And at least for a brief period of time, you think you're going to drown. Jesus doesn't, he's not here to keep you safe from danger. Frequently, Jesus actually leads you into danger. This is not something that's mean. You shouldn't think, well, how cruel of him. Again, that's the sort of American Christian picture of Jesus that's like, life is bad. He's here to make everything better. He's not necessarily here to make everything better in the short term. In fact, frequently, and I'm going to try to resist giving reasons for why he guides us into danger throughout the sermon because he doesn't give a reason in the story. Frequently, though, he guides us into danger for his own good reasons. He sometimes doesn't tell you what those are. See the Job reading. Sometimes he does not answer the question, except just to say, I'm God, I've got this. Don't ask impertinent questions. Sometimes you tell your kids when they're little, and those of you who've had kids, you know you've done this. There's an almost irresistible impulse to do these sorts of things, which I think is a good one. You'll have your kids standing on a wall or something like that, and you'll say, jump down here to me. It's not that high, you know you're going to catch them. They don't know that, though. They're a little freaked out by it. And you want them to be freaked out by it. You want to bring them to this place where they think, I could fall and hurt myself, because what you want them to do is to jump down in your arms and say, oh, I can trust this person. I can trust this guy. Now, I know I'm verging close to giving reasons for why Jesus is doing this. And I don't want to necessarily say that's the reason, although I think it's part of it. But I do want to say he's got reasons that are his own that he doesn't always tell us. Just like parents ask their kids to jump off walls and they don't always say, hey, this is a trust exercise. They just say, do it. Just do it. Let yourself go and do it. Jesus does frequently put us into danger too. Just a part of the Christian life. Don't be surprised by it. Don't be surprised by it. Peter says as much in 1 Peter 4. Peter, who was in the boat with Jesus, says this, Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. When the bad times come, don't say, God, what the heck's going on? You've lost control. Peter says, no, don't be surprised as if something strange is happening to you. This is a part of God's game plan. Instead, rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings. I'll get to that later. We participate in Christ's sufferings when we suffer. He's not a God who doesn't suffer and asks us to suffer. He's a God who suffers right along with us. The cross validates that. Every bit of suffering that you do as a Christian, I'm talking to Christians now, happens within the sphere of Christ's suffering on the cross. So that whatever you're going through, he's gone through it already and is going through it with you now. Rejoice in that. And be glad when his glory is revealed. It doesn't mean, be glad when his glory is revealed, Peter says. It doesn't mean, so there you have it, just be happy all the time. No, it's a rejoicing in suffering that looks through to the end of the story, by faith, of course, when God makes all things right and there are no more storms. There is no more loneliness. There are no more worries about your finances. But meanwhile, when you're going through it, know that it's just a preliminary part of the story where God fixes everything. And for whatever his reasons are, he's bringing us and guiding us through that now. But the main point I want to make here at the beginning is Jesus is in charge of this. This is not plan B. It's not like Jesus is like, dang it, I knew we should have taken the long way around by land. Jesus knows what's happening, and he's guiding his disciples right into the middle of the storm. It's not just that Jesus guides us into storms sometimes, though. Sometimes when Jesus guides us into danger, he falls asleep. Sometimes when Jesus guides us into danger, he falls asleep. A great windstorm arose. The waves were breaking into the boat. You guys have heard this before from sermons, so I don't need to belabor the point too much, but this is pretty normal. I'm told for the Sea of Galilee, there's a cold air coming down off of Mount Hermon, which is north of the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee itself sits below sea level, and so it's warm, and there's lots and lots of storms there. I've never been there, but I've been told, and I've seen pictures of parking lots, car parking lots, alongside the sea, because there's like beaches and places to have picnics and hang out. And there are signs in the parking lots around the Sea of Galilee saying, don't park your car, be careful not to park your car and leave it here too long, because frequently storms will whip up and the parking lots will be flooded by these huge waves. This is not anything that's out of the ordinary. There's a storm here. But remarkably, Jesus was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. So in the middle of the storm, Jesus falls asleep. There's some sort of cushion in the back of the boat, and he falls asleep. Now put yourself in the place of the disciples for a second here. Think about the situation that they're in. They're in a boat, and it's a big storm. Like I say, the Sea of Galilee has big storms. The Greek word for wind here is actually a word that can be translated hurricane. It has to do with like typhoon level storms. Not that this was a hurricane, but that it's a massive storm. And you're in this boat. It's not a big boat. Can I do this one more time? Like some of you like the background, and some of you are like, just get along to what you want to say. About 40 years ago, a boat was found in Capernaum along the Sea of Galilee. It had been buried in the mud. And it looked like it had been buried in mud pretty quickly because it was preserved remarkably. Carbon dated to about the year zero, about the turn of the ages. Sometime in a 30 to 40 year window, right around when Jesus was born. It's in a museum now in Capernaum. It's called the Jesus boat, although it doesn't really have any. There's no evidence that Jesus had anything to do with the boat. But that's what the Jewish tourism, that's the way to get people to come visit your museum in Capernaum. But it's exactly the kind of boat that Jesus would have built and worked on, he and his family, and that his friends would have used. It's not big. It's like 30 feet long, about 8 feet wide. Think about being in a boat like that in a massive storm and the amount of desperation you'd be feeling as it goes from, okay, we know what to do here, to we're in some trouble and we're bailing as fast as we can and this is not working. And the point when you realize that, okay, this isn't just a situation, like I could die tonight. I might die in this storm. And the panic that sets in when you realize we're losing this battle. There's no way we're going to lose this. Now, I say put yourself in the disciples' place, but I don't actually have to really say that because a lot of you have been in that place. You've been in the place where you've gone to the doctor and the doctor said, okay, here's the situation. Here's the treatment plan. And you think, okay, this is bad, but we got this. And then the longer it goes and the more you go back to the doctor and you can see every time that their face looks a little bit more distant from your face. And you realize, I'm losing this. Unless something big happens, I'm not going to win this. Some of you have had this situation with your finances where you don't have any more money and you think, well, I've got this plan and the plan doesn't work out, or you got this expense coming up and you get laid off a week before the expense comes and you're thinking, I'm not going to survive this. There's no way that this is going to end well. And the sense of desperation, knowing I can't fix this, and all the human solutions that I can think of are not available. They're all way off on the shore, and I'm out here in the middle of this financial mess by myself in this boat that's about to be swamped. You know what this feels like. And you also know what it feels like to say, Jesus, where are you at? Why are you sleeping? Don't you care that I'm dying here? I've been believing in you for a long time, or believing in you for a short time. And I thought that it was your job to help me out here. And I've been praying and I get nothing back. This is where the disciples are at. Don't you care that we're perishing? They ask at the end of verse 38. Just like the disciples, we wonder sometimes why Jesus is sleeping. But sometimes Jesus doesn't tell us why he sleeps while we suffer. Jesus takes us through storms. Jesus sleeps sometimes in the middle of the storm. And Jesus doesn't tell us why he's sleeping in the middle of the storm. He wakes up, He calms the storm. You guys know that. He says, peace, be still, which is, this is funny to me. I mean, this is like the ESV. It's a little tip of the cap to the King James Version. It's a picture of Jesus standing up in the boat and kind of royally spreading out his hands and saying, peace, be still. Who says peace? Literally, maybe in 1600 when the King James Version was translated, that's the kind of thing people would say normally. But he actually says, basically, shut up, knock it off. That's what it is. It's very curt, it's very harsh. The word for be still has the sense of like muzzle yourself. He's talking to the weather and he says, that's it, knock it off. It's not this imperious, like, peace, be still. But he actually doesn't answer their question. Don't you care that we perish? He just looks at them and he says, there in verse 40, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? He doesn't answer their questions. Now, for the disciples, I don't know, maybe they're less like this than we are. I know that I'm a lot like this. This is one of our modernist problems is when I say I want help with my health, I want help with my relationship problems, I want help with my finances. What I mean as a modernist is, somebody give me some bullet points here so I can take care of this. Like, somebody give me some instructions. What's the manual? What do I need to do? Like, and that's the kind of question that Jesus can't answer because it's just the wrong question. Like asking Jesus, okay, so God, tell me what to do in this circumstance. I mean, that's a common prayer. It's not bad to do that either, by the way. I'm not saying it's an evil prayer. But frequently it's the wrong prayer. It's the wrong question. God, what do I do in this situation? There's really nothing for you to do, and there's no answer that he can give you. And so he doesn't give an answer, and we're kind of like, well, why don't you say anything? But it's not the kind of thing that has an answer to it. Some things happen in our lives that a solution is not information. Those of you who've played sports, those of you who've played basketball, know what it's like at the end of practice for the coach to say, all right, everybody on the line. And there's a series of wind sprints. I've been in those practices. I remember one time, I was a junior in high school, and like some sort of idiot, I hyperventilated, like in the middle of practice. Like, I couldn't get any air. And if I had asked my coach, why are you doing this to us? What's the solution? What do I need to learn here? What are you trying to get me to learn? There would have been no answer to it because it's not the kind of thing that requires an answer. It's just, I need you to do this because you're going to need it later. That would have been an answer, but it's not information. It's just, you need to trust me and do this. And I know it's painful, but I've got this. I know a guy who's dating a girl, a man who's dating a woman, and they ended up breaking up, and one of the reasons is because there was a constant pressure on her part to affirm that you love me. I need to know, like, do you love me? Prove it to me. I need to know that you love me constantly. Well, anybody who's been in anybody who's had a friend or a significant other knows there's no answer to that question. I can't, there's no words that I could say that could prove this. There's no information that I could download into your brain that would get you to the place where you're like, okay, now I know. You're just gonna have to go along with the ride. Eventually it was too much and they ended up breaking up. Jesus' disciples, I don't know if they're necessarily looking for information or not. They're just kind of scared and ticked off. Jesus doesn't tell them why he sleeps, though. It's not the kind of question that can be answered with a reason. It can only be answered with a person. Like a friendship that you're demanding, do you really like me? Can I trust you? That can't be possibly satisfied with information. It can only be satisfied by embedding your life in the life of the other person. And Jesus wants the disciples to trust him. Not to look for information, but to trust him. So sometimes Jesus leads us into danger. Sometimes when we're in danger, Jesus falls asleep. Sometimes when we're in danger and Jesus is asleep, he doesn't tell us why he was sleeping while we suffered once he wakes up. But, and here's the last part, and this is finally the one that's not negative. Jesus always rescues those who are with him in the boat. He might not tell you why you're suffering, like he doesn't tell Job. But if you're with him in the boat, he will rescue you, guaranteed. Don't you care, they question him? And his response is, again, why are you so afraid? Have you still no faith? The issue is that they don't trust him. That's where the fear comes from. They're afraid of the storm because they don't trust him. And once he does calm the storm, they're still afraid with him. Still afraid of him. In verse 41, they were filled with great fear, said to one another, Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey? They're still afraid because they don't know who he is. They're still afraid because they don't yet trust him. They're afraid during the storm because they don't trust him that he cares for them. Unless they're being sarcastic, they don't trust that he's powerful enough to rescue them. I don't know. At the end of the storm, they're still afraid because they don't know what is this craziness that's in the boat with us. But at any rate, fear always springs from lack of trust. Fear always comes from lack of trust. And a lot of us are afraid, a lot. You're afraid, again, you're afraid about your health. You're afraid about the health of your loved ones. I know this time of the 4-year cycle, a lot of you are afraid that the political baddies are going to win. A lot of us are afraid about the culture going too far to the right or too far to the left or too far in a direction you don't want it to go in. A lot of us are afraid about our money and what's going to happen with that. A lot of us are afraid about our kids and how they're going to turn out, or our grandkids. Behind all these fears, ultimately, listen to me, this is very important. Behind all these fears, whatever they are, ultimately is the question, Jesus, don't you care that I'm perishing? Don't separate that. Don't pretend like you're religious and a great Christian by separating out that question from your fears about the political climate. That always goes to you. You can't be like, I trust Jesus, but I'm freaked out about the way the culture is going. If Jesus is Lord of your finances, if Jesus is Lord of your health, if Jesus is Lord of the culture, of the business world, of the political world, of the entertainment world, then these questions go together. Behind all of your fears, whatever they are, is the question, Jesus, don't you care that I'm perishing? You shouldn't be afraid to ask that question. The disciples do. He's not going to give you an answer, of course. But if you are with him in the boat, he will save you. They needed to believe. Here's the thing. This is why he says, don't you have faith? Faith in what? Faith in him, of course. But specifically, the faith that they needed to have was the faith that Jesus was on a mission to shed his blood to pay for the sins of the world and to renew all things. And if he was in the boat with him, there was no way he was going to drown. He hadn't accomplished that mission yet. There was no way he could die. As long as they were with Jesus, they were in a boat that was unsinkable. Once he gets to the cross, and once Jesus gives up his life, once he throws himself out of the boat, and if any of you have heard echoes to the story of Jonah here, there's lots of them and it's intentional. Once Jesus throws himself out of the boat and dies and calms the storm and comes back to life, again, it's already done. He will never, ever lose again. And if you are in the boat with Jesus, it is guaranteed you will not lose. I'm not saying you won't die. Peter died. I'm not saying there won't be trials. Of course there will be. Don't be surprised when fiery trials come upon you as though something strange is happening to you. But what I am saying is if you stick in the boat with Jesus, you won't lose. Guaranteed. It will not happen. Jesus has completed his mission. He can never, ever lose again. And all we have to do is not necessarily ask for information, although that's not a bad question. He does give us information sometimes, not all the time. Is just stick with him. Don't give up on Jesus. He doesn't lose. The people in your life that you think will win, or the things in your life that you think will win. Right now, there are things that you're afraid about that are going to win. Your boss, you think is going to win. The cancer that you have, you are afraid is going to win. Whichever candidate for whichever political party you hate, you're afraid is going to win. They can't win. None of them can win. Whoever wins the election this year is not going to win. I mean, they might win a 4-year election, but they don't win. Your cancer does not win. Your bad finances don't win. Your broken relationships don't win. Jesus wins. Stick with him in the boat. Let's pray. Father, thank you for loving us and for being good to us. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for not being a God who stands off at a distance and watches us suffer. Thank you for climbing in the boat with us. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.